The attempts to stop the peasant crusade had turned it into a rebellion. As word spread, more peasants rose up all over the Pannonian basin, some led by priests and friars, others by very minor nobles, some by charismatic peasant leaders. Some destitute minor nobles with no peasants of their own also joined the rebellion. The growing rebellious mass put pressure on villages, castles, towns, and cities to make them surrender and join the rebellion, or they were ransacked. But all of these rebelling groups didn't coordinate with each other. There was no grand plan. This was an outpouring of anger and rage against the system that was putting more and more demands on the peasantry while failing to provide the promised security. The rebel Franciscans preached that by attempting to stop the crusade, the lords had forfeited their rights. Thus the rebels attacked feudal holdings, castles, manor houses, churches, monasteries, with the aim of destroying feudal records, contracts, and other documents that recorded the peasants' feudal obligations and were used to justify their workloads and burdens before the law. The only peasant force that seemed to have had some sort of plan appears to have been under the command of George Doja. At the beginning of June, they were raiding noble holdings and besieging castles in the region of Sriem. Then, Doja turned the army eastwards towards Temishvar, laying siege to it on the 13th of June. Another part of Doja's army, or another rebel army entirely, under the command of a friar named Lawrence, went north and occupied Varad. The intent appears to have been to spread the rebellion to Transylvania. Why this course of action was chosen is not exactly known. Transylvania was very defensible, and part of its population had reason to be resentful of the powers that be. Policies in Transylvania already divided its three constituent nations, and when Prince Louis was born in 1506, a celebratory tax led to an uprising in the Sekil population, which was suppressed by the Hungarian nobility and the Transylvanian Saxon burghers. A year later, the Sekils would retaliate against the Saxons. The appointment of Janos Zapolya as voivode of Transylvania in 1510 was initially welcomed by the Sekils, as he was a figure in opposition to the king and his advisors. But Zapolya put no effort into solving Transylvania's internal divisions, leaving things largely as they were. Thus some historians speculate that Doja, himself a Sekil, wanted to bring the Sekils into the rebellion. Others don't think this would have worked, as the Sekils saw themselves as equals of the nobility and would not have found common cause with mere peasants. Back in Buda, the royal council was panicking. King Wladislav is reported to have been numbed into inaction from the shock. A general levy of the nobility was proclaimed but would take time to assemble. At the very least, the rebels had been chased away from the Buda and Pest area. In Transylvania, Voivode Zapolya and the estates of Transylvania were able to coordinate the defense fairly quickly, as they had assembled for a diet on the 18th of June. Voivode Janos Zapolya took one army to relieve Temishvar, while the vice-voivode led a second army to relieve Cluj, which had been surrounded by Friar Lawrence's army. Cluj had opened its gates to Friar Lawrence and his officers, but under the condition that the rest of the army stay outside. When the relief force reached Cluj around the 10th of July and began fighting the peasants, the Cluj town guards used the opportunity to assassinate a great number of the peasant officers, not including Friar Lawrence, who was outside with the army at that moment. Friar Lawrence's army was forced to retreat and slowly disintegrated. Janos Zapolya engaged, defeated, and captured George Doja near Temishvar on the 15th of July. For leading the rebellion, treason against the kingdom, and attempting to upend the social order, Doja was forced to sit on a burning iron throne, crowned with a red-hot iron crown, and forced to hold a smouldering scepter while his flesh was peeled from his body, and his lieutenants were forced to bite into it before being put to death themselves. As for the peasantry, some say that there was mass torture of peasants following the suppression of the rebellion. Others say that nothing happened to the peasants, who escaped capture and returned to work or did no crimes against their own lord, at least that nothing happened immediately. Following the rebellion, the peasants that engaged in it were royally pardoned, so that they wouldn't have to be executed for treason. Some peasants, for obvious reasons, couldn't return to their own lord's land, and instead fled to others, where they were accepted into the workforce. The Diet of the Realm assembled for a special session in October of 1514. For saving the realm, Janos Zapolya was awarded a significant amount of money. For inadvertently causing the rebellion, Cardinal Bakac was humiliated and forced out of politics. For the time. He would remain a private advisor to the king and guardian and tutor of Prince Louis. Janos Zapolya already had great influence. In 1512 he got his younger sister Barbara married to King Władyslav's brother, King Sigismund of Poland-Lithuania. And now rumors were circulating that Zapolya would be the one to marry King Władyslav's daughter Anna. Zapolya also looked like he was on the cusp of attaining the office of Palatine, if not higher office. The Diet of October of 1514, of course now dominated with anti-peasant sentiment, laid out the punishment for the rebellion. Along with many other rights, the peasants' right to free movement was effectively revoked. The peasants had to pay for the damages caused by the rebellion. Their obligations towards their seniors were also increased. All peasants and their descendants were now tied to the land of its owners in perpetuity. The king was not allowed to raise peasants to the rank of bishop, and minor clerics were banned from carrying weapons except while traveling. It should be noted that Cardinal Bakac and other bishops created under King Matthias were peasants or other commoners. A very important book was also presented to the diets of 1514. In 1505, the king had, under the direction of the diet, charged Stephen Verbozzi with the task of writing a legal codex that contained the laws of the realm, which were previously written down in other documents or were part of the unwritten, customary and common law. Verbozzi's Tripartitum was completed in 1514, just prior to the rebellion, and then amended. Split into 3 parts, the Tripartitum Split into 3 parts, the Tripartitum covered the subjects of the law and their legal relationships, legal procedure, and the miscellaneous collection of laws and legal matters. It condensed Verbozzi's interpretation of what the law and the constitutional order of the realm should be, and that put the whole of the nobility at the center of the system. The Tripartitum claimed ancient origin of the legal and constitutional order from the Scythians and Huns. It emphasized the legal supremacy of the warrior nobility, who were the Hungarian people, the nation, and were all equal to each other. It outlined the reciprocal relationship between the nobility and their elected king, who needed no other intermediary to be made king, but the election by the nobility. For the king was but the first servant of the crown, and the crown was the holy embodiment of the nation. Thus the diet of the nobility was the supreme authority in all matters, while the king's authority of approval and assent was recognized, as his power did come from the diet. The Tripartitum also emphasized the natural rights of the nobility over their subjects, with almost no obligations towards them. It repeated the nobility's exemption from paying taxes, and it reinforced that if any of our princes and kings should venture to act contrary to the liberties of the nobles, then, as stated and expressed in the decree of the most illustrious prince, our former Lord King Andrew II, which decree every Hungarian king is wont to swear on oath to observe before the holy crown is placed on his head, they have forevermore the liberty to resist and oppose him without the charge of infidelity. But by Verbotzi's Tripartitum, Hungarian law only applied to Hungary proper. Because we see that the long-established laws and customs of the kingdoms of Dalmatia, Croatia, Slavonia, and of Transylvania, which have long been subject to the Holy Crown, vary in certain terms and articles from the laws of our country, namely this Kingdom of Hungary, and they have the right to use and enjoy these customs, and are allowed, even now, with the prince's consent, to make statutes and ordinances among themselves. Nevertheless, they cannot establish any law in contravention of the general statutes and decrees of this Kingdom of Hungary. There are furthermore in Transylvania privileged nobles, originating from the Scythian people, whom we call by the name of Székely. They enjoy quite different laws and customs. They are very skilled in warfare, and they distribute inheritances and offices among themselves in the manner of the ancients. Now, the Tripartitum was never sanctioned as law by the Diet, never received the royal seal. Its contents were interpreted by some to be unfavorable to the king, the magnates, and the clergy. So none of what I just told you became the official written law of the realm. But the Tripartitum was later approved for use as a manual in the courts. Due to not being officially sanctioned, it was not printed by the state. Verbotzi had to finance the printing himself in Vienna in 1517. It allegedly became the second most popular book among the realm's nobility, next to the Bible. It had great influence on the practical side of the law, and the legal and constitutional education of the realm's nobility, including in Croatia and Transylvania. And while these events of 1514 were going on, the Ottomans attempted to take the Croatian royal fortress of Knin, but failed.